So today I wanted to show you some surface design techniques, and you can pretty much do these in any order for the test tiles that we're going to do or the small experimental surface design pieces. The first one that I'm going to show you is Sgraffito. So Sgraffito is where you are going to apply glaze to the surface of your piece when it is approximately leather hard to just past leather hard. You don't want there to be too much moisture on the surface of your piece because there's also moisture in the glaze. So it's not really going to want to absorb into the surface of the clay. You also don't want the clay to be too dry because it'll get too porous, and the water from the glaze can actually cause cracks if you kind of overglaze and overdo it, which can be kind of a problem, and they won't really want to adhere to each other. So after they're glazed, then you can do carving through the surface of the glaze and actually reveal the underlying surface clay color. So this one here, we have a beautiful design that one of my students did where he glazed the piece and did a bit of a fade from a dark blue to a light blue. Then we did a photo transfer technique, and then he had basically a little template of his design with the photo transfer technique, which is a really cool hack. And then he was able to barely carve, you just barely carve, and I mean minimal, like 1/8 of an inch. You don't need to scratch through the glaze very much to reveal the underlying clay body. You never want to carve more than about half the thickness of the clay body itself because you will get cracks, okay? Your clay is going to shrink as it dries, and so those areas that are thin are going to shrink faster because they have less moisture because they're thinner. So you want to be really cognizant of how thin your clay is getting. So this person barely carved through to reveal that underlying clay body, just kind of scratch the surface. So that is a really nice example. So that's Sgraffito. Next we have Mishima. Now you're also going to carve with Mishima, but you do something a little bit different. So this one, for instance, what we have here is the carving, and then they have inlaid glaze into the carving itself. Whereas this one here, there's no glaze inlaid into the carving. Now you can do a combo if you'd like, where you carve and then you inlay. So this one is kind of a combo piece. So they actually glazed it while it was leather hard. They carved it, so they did Sgraffito. But then after it was bisque fired, they inlaid that baby blue glaze that you see, which would be the Mishima. So Sgraffito is carving through this surface to reveal the underlying clay body, but then after it was bisque fired, they inlaid that baby blue glaze, which would be Mishima. So carving through the surface is Sgraffito. Mishima is the inlaying of another clay or another glaze. So that is a little bit hard to remember. You can do this either by carving or stamping. So this person did Mishima or a staining by way of stamping. So you can stamp or carve, and then after it's been bisque fired, I would do that after. You can do the stain because then you're going to want to sponge away from the surface. So after being bisque fired, that's what's helpful, because if you can envision sponging away the surface, if your clay hasn't been fired and you sponge away, you're going to rehydrate the surface of the clay, and that's not good because you're going to be introducing moisture back into a surface that may have already begun to shrink. So that's not good. Then we've got wax resist. Now wax resist is a lot of fun. This one was done with a stencil, as was this one. So the wax resist is really cool because you can wax the surface and then you glaze over it, and the wax actually resists the glaze. That's why it's called wax resist. And what happens is the wax actually repels or resists the glaze, and what you're left is the underlying clay body. So this is actually a red clay body, which provides a nice contrast. So you want to pick a glaze color that's going to have a nice high contrast with the clay body that you've chosen. Then you would do your clear coat after it's been bisque fired. Next we have mono printing. Mono from the Latin for one, What you're gonna do is actually, you can print an image offline if you'd like to, just to get to know this technique, or you can draw an original design. You can apply your glaze directly onto the paper of the image that you've printed, or you can do the glazing directly onto a tissue paper if you've got a surface that's curved. And then you're gonna kind of agitate the back of the tissue or the paper, and you're going to transfer the image essentially from the paper onto the clay body after you've applied the glaze to the paper. And that'll give you an image that you can touch up if you'd like. It's not a true pure mono print if you touch it up, because remember, mono means one, but it is a good thing to do to touch it up if you don't get a true great transfer. So this one's been touched up after they transferred it. So you can use that transfer just to kind of get you going, get an image over onto the surface of the clay. You can also use decals for the same purpose. Those are totally viable. And then you can glaze over top of them. Then we also have screen printing, which I will show you how to do that. And you can use store-bought screen prints from the clay company. And there's some special silkscreen medium that you're actually going to want to add to your underglazes. You don't want to do the silk screening to runny glossy glazes. It doesn't give you a really good silkscreen transfer. So I have used a black underglaze, and I added just a pinch of silkscreen medium to kind of gel up or gum up the glaze. So you can see it's a little more gummy. And then I applied the silkscreen glossy side down to get the transfer of my image to my surface. So I will show you how to do that as well. Some other ways that you can apply your glazes would just be to be very painterly, and by that I mean doing what you would exactly do on the surface of a canvas. So you can do kind of a fade effect. You can do a combo where you've got the wax resist, add the wax, peel the stencil up, and then you can do your glazing and get a kind of a fade effect in the background.